Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our March edition of our Parenting with Pride webinar. I'm so excited. It is tomorrow is Transgender Day of Visibility, and we are going to be celebrating some incredible voices here across Florida, some trans leaders that I'm excited to introduce to folks that don't know them, and those that do, you can help celebrate the incredible work that they are doing. My name is Jennifer Solomon, and I am the Senior Manager for Equality Florida's Parent and Family Support. I run the Parenting with Pride program, and so if this is your first time, welcome. Pull up a chair, grab some water, tea, wine, whatever helps you relax. This is a space where every month we come together to really learn from each other and just be in community. So I'm so happy that y'all are here. I'm letting folks in. One of the things I want to make sure folks know that we do record our session, although there isn't anything in the chat that is recorded. But just so folks know that, then it is available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So if you miss it, or if there's someone that you know that would have really loved to join, they can go back and we keep all our recordings. So with that, I am excited today to really talk about something that's so important, and that is visibility. And honestly, visibility is not just being visible, and it's not just being seen. It's also about being known. And to me, that is what is really so important and so valued, and to be able to live openly and fully. And tonight, we are going to be centering joy. We are going to be centering hope. And so, whether you are wherever you are in your journey, whether it's your personal journey, whether you're here as a parent, as a loved one, you're going to hear some real stories tonight from incredible leaders, and you're going to hear about maybe some challenges that they've had, and some moments that have really shaped them. So before I begin, I just want you to know that you belong in this space. Sometimes folks aren't sure if, this is a space they should be in, but Transgender Day of Visibility is about, being in the sun. We're here in Florida and really shining a light on what community is. And as an advocate, you are part of that community. So I'm so happy that everyone is here tonight. And also, I just want to make sure that, again, folks know that it is going to be recorded. Feel free to go in the chat. You can put, if you have questions, we're hoping we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. But if there's any comments or any pressing things, feel free to use the chat. And I really want to get started because we only have an hour, and we always end sometimes a couple minutes after, but we have so much to share. So thank you again for being here. And I'm going to start with, rather than reading everyone's long bios, because we've got some incredible panelists here today, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. And so sit back and get ready to really be blown away by these incredible leaders. I am going to start with my colleague, someone who I love so much, and I'm so honored that I get to do this work with every single day. And she is literally pulled over on the side of her trek home from I'm sure, some incredible work event, so that she can be here. So Angelique, will you introduce yourself? And then what you can do is just kind of popcorn over, because you know who our panelists are.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Hi, nice to see some of you again. Nice to meet some of you for the first time. My name is Angelique Godwin. I'm the director for transgender equality with Equality Florida. And my story is, it's pretty cool, I think. I like to think so. I'm 39. I'm an Afro-Latina trans woman who only started my journey 9 years ago. And so I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and I am currently in school for my doctorate in psychology. It's something that I love, something I fell in love with unintentionally. It was not on my bingo card, but here I am. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys and kind of talk a little bit more about experiencing trans joy and gender euphoria and what it means to live authentically as oneself and in one's truth, aka standing in the sun. And I'll pop it over to EC.
Good evening, everybody. My name is E.C. Pizarro III. Pronouns are he and him. I'm also Afro-Latino. I promise I'm not copying off of Angelique. I was born in New York, raised in New Jersey, um, living in sunny South Florida. I love it here. I'm a technologist, advocate, public speaker, entrepreneur. I'm excited for this conversation. I've worked in nonprofit. I've received services from nonprofit and resources from nonprofits. Um, I've been medically transitioning for 14 years, I think. Yeah, 14 years this year. One thing that's unique about my journey is majority of my transition, I lived stealth. So I've only been visible and open about my trans experience for like the last 3 to 4 years, but I was working in community the entire time. So my experience is super unique, but I'm excited to share it with the panelists, and I will pass it over to Ashley.
Thank you, Easy. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Figueroa. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am a proud Latina woman residing in Orlando, Florida, originally from Puerto Rico. I have been in Orlando actually for most of my life, for about 20 years. Came here when I was 9, so now you can do the math and know how old I am. And so I am, I am the executive director for Gender Advancement Project, and also I am the legislative affairs director for Positively You, where I work around legislative work, advocating for communities in healthcare, HIV, as well as transgender community. And I will pop it on to Steph.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steph. I go by the they, them series pronouns. I am the executive director of Ripple House, which is a third space sanctuary for trans and non-binary folks who are also BIPOC here in Orlando, Florida. I started my transition about during the pandemic, so about 6 years ago almost. I medically transitioned about 5 years ago. Um, I've been in the activist field for, well over 6, 7 years. I'm originally from Salem, Massachusetts, the witchy place. And I found myself fighting the fire here in Central Florida. Well, happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm so excited to really dive into each of you because I know that your stories have similarities, but there's differences, and I think that the folks here tonight, again, depending on whether you're a parent with a young transgender child or maybe an adult child, I hope you walk away tonight with finding some hope and comfort in hearing these stories. So we will get started, and what I'm going to start with is let's hear your story. And again, I had told our panelists to share as little or as much as they want, and the only thing I ask with our questions is to be respectful of that. So I will start with, I'm just randomly looking at my screen. EC, you're on my left. So maybe we'll start with you. Share what your journey has looked like for you.
Yeah, sure. So, my journey, as I mentioned earlier, most of my organizing career I was stealth. I actually started organizing with Black folks, Black Youth Project 100 in Washington, D.C. I've moved around a lot. I live in South Florida for my mental health. I love the sun, hence why I love the name of this conversation, Standing in the Sun, because I have literally chosen to stand and stay in the sunshine when other people have chosen to leave. Um, I've built visibility, community, and infrastructure for folks. So I've worked on the International Trans Visibility March, the first one that happened in 2019 in Washington, D.C., as a director of communications and social media. Um, I was stealth, so I dealt with a lot of backlash from my own community because I did not disclose that I was of trans experience. And last about 3, 4 years ago, I took a position as the executive director of Trans Tech Social Enterprises, where I assisted trans people with getting into the field of technology. So, identifying transferable life skills for them to get into technology, as well as providing them with access to employment and resources and certifications. Most people don't know tech jobs, entry level, $65,000 a year, plus benefits that can change a trans person's lives, especially when you talk about plus benefits. The tech industry is notorious for being one of the most inclusive when it comes to insurance policies, even though we see tech giants up there with the the right. Their policies and the people that are there don't match what the CEOs are really talking about. Um, yeah, my journey has just been really complex because I spent most of it stealth. So a lot of it has been a journey to figure out who I am without the critique of others. I didn't intend to be stealth. I just was living my life still within community, and community start to have questions. And I'm thinking that I'm just moving through space and everybody just knows because we all are, right? Um, and a lot of my advocacy is around not knowing. You don't have to know. There is no teller, or as I like to say, a lavender tea that trans people have where you can identify a trans person in space. So really never assumed. I decided really early. I didn't see a lot of trans men. I didn't see a lot of Black trans men in leadership or even in media, in storytelling. So when I realized very early that there weren't tables for me to sit at or be at, I decided to build them. So hence working on the March, Trans Tech. I'm now the production manager for the Not Your Average Girl Tour for Hope Giselle, which is on a 6-city run right now. We have a sold out show on Friday, and we just got back from New York. Um, but it's all encompassing, and a lot of those things have nothing to do with me being trans. So a lot of my journey is me being a human being, and I just happen to have a trans medical experience. But also fighting for my community because I understand my privilege as someone who is cis assumed cisgender in most, if not all spaces, that I can have conversations with folks that other people and my comrades can't have because they're too thrown off by other things and they're letting their biases play a role in having that conversation when I can just have a conversation and it go and then later be like, so you do know a trans person, you've been talking to one for the last 15-20 minutes. Hi, how are you? And that's a lot of how my advocacy works. So my journey has been a bit of everything, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I feel like it's very specific and divine.
I love that. Yeah, I think a lot of parents when I talk to them, especially if they're like very early on in their journey with their child, the question of should they be stealth is something that comes up a lot. And I don't think we hear enough about it. And so I love that you're talking about that as, part of your journey, but you're a human being and you can step into spaces that folks probably wouldn't have any idea because right, and that I love that, thank you. And that is something that there's pros and cons. When I talk to parents, especially when we're talking about like in the school system, and kids are really young and they can pass, right? I mean, before puberty, I mean, with change of clothes and pronouns and name, right? I mean, you can. And so that I'm sure we're going to have a lot of folks that are interested in hearing what that journey kind of has been like for you. So thank you for giving us that perspective. And yeah, y'all are like rock stars. I mean, I don't know how you do all the things that you do, but I love that. And I can't wait to hear more about it. Ashley, you are the next one on my screen. So I will go to you.
Yes, so hello again. And before I go on and start talking, and I can talk forever, I love talking, I love people. I just wanted to recognize every single one of you here, the parents or family members, loved ones of a trans child, because you all are just exceptional. You're all amazing because of the fact that you are loving the individual. It does make a difference, and it's so, so important. These are stuff that you already know, but I did want to take a moment to highlight that. So thank you all. And know that you're not alone. You have all of us here with you, and we stand with you, and we continue to advocate to ensure that, your loved one does have the necessary opportunities and human rights. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more about me. So, like I mentioned, I work in the advocacy space. It's something that kind of happened naturally, I would say. When I first transitioned, I was working at a financial institution, and when I went to do my transition, I went through the process, and for my manager, I was a regional mortgage originator, and had a conversation with my manager at the time and told her, "Hey, I wanted to let you know that I'm transitioning from male to female, and I'm going to take some time off and I'm going to come back and I'm going to be presenting as Ashley and etc. And the first thing she said was, "Thank you so much. Can I please," she said, "Can I please give you a hug?" And she got up, she gave me a hug. And to me, that was so like it made such a difference, because I will tell you, when I was getting ready to have that conversation, I was like, okay, well, it was a long journey to get there, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna lose my job and this and that. So, she was really affirming. And so she was just great. And from there, talked to HR. Honestly, the company didn't really know how to handle it. When I went to HR, they were like, hey, like, how do we do this? You're gonna have to hold our hand. So long story short, reached out to Gina Duncan. At the time, she was in Quality, Florida. I had seen her story on the newspaper, Orlando Sentinel, the importance of, stories telling for those that are wanting to do it. And so there were a lot of similarities with Gina and I. She worked at a bank, she transitioned on the job and all those kind of things. So she came in and started working with HR, and I went off for like a month, came back presenting as Ashley. And I honestly had a successful journey. When I came back, I had already, they had already talked to the team and informed the team that, this person's coming back as Ashley, they're transgender, so they're going to be utilizing the female restroom and everything. So I was really lucky that I had that opportunity, right, in that space that created that positive environment for me, and I didn't experience discrimination. And really from there, I started living a self life after like a year. I feel like at the beginning, my profile on LinkedIn at the time, I don't know if LinkedIn still has this, but they had like the leaderboard of the company, and my profile was like 33 out of like 650 employees. And then when they shared the news, I went to number one, and I was number one for like 3 months. Everybody was like trying to look at pictures and all that kind of stuff. Well, after about a year, it became normal thing. People weren't really talking about it. I was like, I really don't want this whole identity thing to cause an issue with my productivity, with my clients and stuff. So I kind of just want to live a stealth life. I don't want to really like, I don't want people to know that I'm trans. And so I did do that. And I did that for about 2 years. And after 2 years, I decided, I was like, I felt like I was living my life to societal norms. I was, adjusting who I was to ensure that they wouldn't know, so they wouldn't experience discrimination. I wouldn't experience discrimination and stuff like that. And I would hide a lot behind being a mom at the time. I was a stepmother, to a little one. And I would kind of hide that because I kind of fit that whole picture perfect. I was married to the cisgender man, with the child, and they thought I was his mom, and they didn't know the story that I was a stepmom. So I kind of hid behind that, and it worked out in the self process. But after 2 years of that, I said, I'm like walking a certain way. I'm like overanalyzing how I'm talking and what I'm wearing because I don't want people to know. And I said, I am done with that. I'm just going to be myself 100%. And whoever knows, knows. And if there's issues, then we'll deal with them. So I decided to do that. And I feel like that's when I really started living, to be honest with you, when I was able to be myself, like 24%, 24/7. After that, I took some time off, started learning community, being around trans spaces like T Network at the time. It was a space for trans people in Orlando to network, along with like allies, businesses, and stuff. And through there, I met community and started learning that there was a lot of needs. So I said, you know what? I have the experience that I bring in the corporate world. And so I have opportunity and privilege that I'm realizing it's necessary to advocate for the needs of the community as well and the people that are afraid to speak up and all that. So that's when I got into advocacy and decided that I was going to use the space to ensure that I could advocate.
I love that. And Ashley is like featured. If you follow Equality Florida, you're going to see that we have a lot more. So if you're interested, right, Ashley, you are every time I turn on my social media with Equality Florida, I'm seeing a lot of information. Some of that what you've shared, but you are being also highlighted. So that's great, and that's a whole nother perspective that is very different than ECs, but yet I see some of the similarities of those moments that you really found that, and that's kind of one of my questions later on. Like, was there that moment? But I love that. Thank you for sharing your story. Steph, we're going to go over to you.
Oh, well, my journey has been definitely the path less traveled. I was assigned female at birth and, right into a very super evangelical family. And I didn't necessarily even know that it was a possibility that my gender would be what it is now, which is I'm a two-spirit individual, I'm non-binary. A lot of people, for some reason, have struggled with the idea of me looking the way that I look, but then also, having you know, a different identity label to put onto it as, a non-binary individual. So I grew up kind of really, really confused and frustrated with how society saw me in every facet. When I was, treated like a female, it felt deeply wrong, and I didn't know really how to process any of that. And of course, I went through a lot of, different phases as a teenager trying to figure it out. And kind of like struggling with that. And then also, my parents were pastors, so the church was a big influence as well. And, I never really thought that I could be free as myself. And frankly, it took the pandemic to happen for my jobs that I was distracting myself with to be absolutely gone. And then I realized, when I had really not much to do during the day, I realized that I was uncomfortable in my body still. And, the process began then of me kind of exploring my discomfort and why I was so uncomfortable. And I realized that a lot of the discomfort happened from other labels from other people and like what I felt like I had to be. So I did like experience a lot of the hyper masculinization that happens, which is like I wanted to be like by any means necessary the most masculine person, or and then that also after a while, much like Ashley, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right having to overanalyze myself, and so it was the first time ever where I was asked my pronouns. It was like I think it was like something like 2021. I was late to the game because I was very sheltered as like an evangelical kid. So I branched out slowly but surely. And I was asked my pronouns, and I got stuck. I said the wrong pronouns because I was never really asked before. I was living my life at that time like as a lesbian. So I said, "Oh, my pronouns are she, her." And then the person who asked me kind of like really like curiously like tilted their head, and I never forgot that. And I kind of was like, oh, there's something to that. Maybe I like this discomfort that I'm feeling saying that those are my pronouns. And then also that reassurance is like, these labels, I have to do a little bit more digging and finding out what really does fit for me. And so I went down this little rabbit hole of like who I am, my indigenous side, and what gender roles actually mean and what it means to be binary. And I just realized, you know what? I'm just not. I'm just not a man. I'm just not a woman. I am Steph. I'm non-binary. That's always felt the best for me. And so from then on, I really just, took that. I just took that and made that my confidence, really, just being somebody who, doesn't usually get seen the way that I actually am. But I also realized throughout the way that like how people perceive me is none of my business, really. And so with that, I was able to, create a space for advocacy for trans masculine and non-binary people, or non-binary people just all together. And really that's how I created Ripple House, my organization, because I had really no spaces that saw, you know, folks that are trans that outside of the gender binary. Unfortunately, like even us trans folks, we struggle with having to feel like we need to look a certain type of way or present a certain type of way or carry ourselves a certain type of way. So yeah, my life kind of really just took off after I realized who I was, and that I wanted to create more spaces for people like me.
Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
I do hear it from parents often because the way you brought up, being trans, all of a sudden it's assuming that you're going to be very binary, and that is not the case. And so, when I talk to parents, especially with kids, it is a journey, and I have had quite a few parents with kids that started with trans and being like very binary to moving more in the non-binary space, and parents having questions like, does that mean they're not trans? Are they changing their mind? And it's like, no, they're evolving, they're finding, like you said, you realize that didn't really fit either. And so I love you being on here and being able to bring that perspective, because I think we sometimes stereotype trans folks and think that they are going to be very completely one binary other. But, non-binary really opens that up for so many folks. My child is gender nonconforming. So although he uses he, him pronouns, and his pronouns are are male, his expression is female. And that's a whole nother space. I was like, are you trans? Are you not? And so I think that, hearing from each one of you, we understand that the experience is so different, that the labels don't always fit. But, the respect and the way we present ourselves to the world. I love that. Thank you, Steph. So Angelique, I'm going to move you into our second question. I want you to kind of combine your journey into challenges because, we know that is a big part of the journey, right? If we all got on here and said, yes, we're all in this great space now, look at these amazing things we're doing, and we never had anything that, challenged us, that wouldn't be truthful. And so we want this to be a safe space so that we can talk about, things that have been challenging for us. And sometimes challenges are a positive thing. Hey, if I had not moved into this space, it wouldn't have challenged me to get here. And sometimes it's something that kind of moves us backwards. So, Angelique, I'd love for you to share, your journey and a little bit of challenges that you've had.
Yeah, much like everybody else, my story is a little unique, but also kind of it's a little bit of both. It's got a little bit of reward and a little bit of sadness. But I grew up in a really loving home and a really I had I had like four great parents. My parents both divorced and then remarried, and everybody was really good to me my whole life growing up. I never really knew what the gay community was. The gay community was just community. I had lesbian aunts and I had a lot of different people who were different in my family or flamboyant cousins, things like that. But we never looked at them as any different. They're just family. So it wasn't until I got older that I met people who kind of told me what things were or led me along the way. I think much to Steph's factor, I always love explaining my journey like Russian dolls. I started off as a little gay person, and then I grew into a bisexual person as I came out bisexual, and then I was like full blown gay, and then I was a drag queen, and then now I'm a trans woman, right? And along that journey, it was kind of one part self discovery, also some part fear of letting people down and not being what the world had aspired me to be, or wanted me to be, or my family had wanted to be, meeting those standards of expectations of not only what I saw from my siblings, but also what I thought I felt from my family and things like that. So it was a really interesting thing to kind of learn about the trans experience. Up until that point, I was just me. I didn't have a name or a label that really fit me. I wasn't, masculine. I wasn't feminine. I could still change attire, but I could also do makeup. So I really didn't know where I fit. And it wasn't until I was in college that I met younger trans experienced people, because up until that point, I had only met older trans people, and older trans people usually either live a very eclectic, unique life, working from home or working in a specific type of way, whether it's working in a nightclub, working in community, working for a gay establishment, or they are unfortunately on the darker side of things. They are working in sex work or prostitution or something to that effect. So I didn't have anybody to look up to that made me feel comfortable enough to make the jump or the journey. And it wasn't until I met two younger trans women who were going to my school, and they kind of helped me learn that like it was possible and things weren't as hard to do, and that was something I could do if I truly wanted it. And so that was the first obstacle, was the realization that it was possible and learning what I could do. And I learned that back when I was like 23. And then so it took me 5 years of research and hesitation and experimentation with being out in public and seeing how I felt, let alone how I was received. There's a lot of stigma that comes with being trans that people don't tell you about: the sexualization, the fetishization, the reality that we are kind of thought of as these almost societal puns in ways. We're meant to be funny and endearing and motherly like, but we're not meant to be actual mothers or be actual people who you turn to, right? We're just the person who gets you through and then you move on. And so there were a lot of hesitations for me, but um the biggest thing that happened that made me like that shot me into my transition was right at the start of living my life on a day to day before I started the medical transition aspect of it. I was the victim of SA. And so surviving that instance and realizing that if I hadn't survived that instance, that people would never have known who I really was. No one would have really, I would have been buried by the wrong name. I would have been buried under the wrong pseudonym. People would have talked about this life I built in service of pleasing other people's ideas of what I should be or who I should be, and not in service of myself and my dreams and what I felt and what I wanted. And so when I walked away from that situation after everything was said and done, I made a promise to myself that I would never put myself last like that ever again, that I would live my life to the fullest and do all the things that I was meant to do. I wanted people to meet the real me for the first time, to hear and see me as I saw myself. And that was a really big realization. It was a really huge thing to do, to swallow all my fears, my prides, my hopes, my dreams, and go to my family and say, "Hey, you guys, I started my hormone journey. In a year, I won't look the same. I won't be the same person. So you guys have to understand, like, I get it. If you don't love me anymore, if you don't need me anymore, if you don't like me anymore." I went full heartedly into that conversation expecting everyone to leave me. But I knew that if I didn't do that, I would not be living my life. I wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't take that step and go in that direction. I was very welcomely surprised that everybody supported it. And it took a little bit for pronouns like everybody else. But over time, people saw my transition. They saw my happiness. They saw my joy. They saw me um, showing up in ways they had never shown before. And everybody always used to say this terminology that I always hear is like, "Oh, you're glowing. Oh, you're so happy." And that was really the first time I realized that I had made the best choice ever, was choosing me, was choosing that I get to wake up and be so happy with myself and the decisions I've made. And that's kind of my journey without going too deep into it. But if you want, you can always slide into my DMs if you got personal questions about it. I'll go deeper later. But that was what I think it was the catalyst for me. It was the biggest obstacle I faced. It was me. I was in my way. And what I thought and what I feared really stopped me from being my best self. And it's sad that something like that had to happen. But also, I'm so thankful that I have the chance to be me, that I had the chance to truly transform my life into a beacon of what it means to be your authentic self and to love yourself unconditionally and not wait for people to love you that way.
That's amazing and empowering, and I didn't know that part of your story, Angelique. And you are a light that walks in the room. I mean, you have so much to give, and I'm sad that that had to be the moment, but I love that it was something that you realized, like, this is it. I need to be authentic to myself. So, oh, I love you. That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that with
Yeah,
everyone.
of course. Thank you.
EC, I'm going to go over to you, and I want to make sure we get to all our questions. So I'm probably just going to hit you with this one, and then we'll move on to our next one. But is there a challenge, something that, specifically in your life, was that sort of pivotal time for you that you would like to share?
Yeah, so for me, that moment came similar to Steph during the pandemic. I had, at that time, I had been living out in Florida for maybe 4 years. I got laid off from my corporate job. So when I was Stealth, I was working a corporate job in a creative department for a technology firm. Um, and I got laid off from my job. I had moved out here and I was engaged to be married. The engagement was called off. Um, and everything was pretty much to down the toilet. And I kept trying to get into community and I was getting a lot of backlash. I love my non-binary siblings and I love my community. And I understand the conversation around not everybody is binary. But my experience is very revolutionary for me to be as masculine as I am and to show up the way I am. As the firstborn, quote, daughter of an upper middle class Black family, there was a lot of expectations of what I was supposed to be, especially when the family is majority Black women. So for me to buck the system all the way and be like, actually, I am not hyper feminine. I am hyper masculine. It was very, very liberating for me. And during that time, me living out here, my favorite uncle committed suicide. And I saw him as the guy that had everything. Attractive Black man in the 90s. He was one of the top associates at Goldman Sachs. He had the house, he had the wife, all of the things. And his mental health still got the best of him. And for me, that was the turning point of I can't care what anybody else says. And really standing, yes, I am this masculine. No, I don't know what that means. I wasn't brought up around an immense amount of LGBT community, but I'm down to learn. I also don't ostracize my non-binary siblings because that ain't none of my business. Like this is just how I show up. Accept how I show up, and I'll accept how you show up. Um, but it was a he did it in a kind of traumatic way. He did it the day before his birthday. And I took that as a very intentional sign of he really was over it. And my grandmother had told me a few months prior that she was in love with a woman, and that's why she left the South. And she was never out. Um, People that knew, but she was never out. And just to think that, I wasn't necessarily doing what I set out to do because I was thinking about what other people had to say about how masculine I was and how I presented, how I showed up. And that was a moment where I really said F it. And really put my mental wellness first and my spiritual wellness first and decided that my trans experience is a part of me, but it is not all of me. I'm so much more. It's a medical experience, is what I like to really tell folks. But there's so many different parts of me that I could nurture, the artist, the painter, the public speaker, the poet, that I could really tap into to really live my fullest self. Um, and mental health with Black men, trans or not, is something that's really not talked about. And for a man who, in the public eyes, had it all, didn't necessarily have it all. Um, that was something that it just hit home where I like to be vulnerable about the challenges and the successes I have with my mental health. A lot of people ask me, with the laws and the legislations we see coming down in Florida, like, you should move, you should get out. And I'm like, Florida has saved my life. The fact that I don't have to deal with winters and I can be with the sunshine, near the water, by the beach, all that has really saved me. So, those are some challenges that there's been quite a few, but that's the one that I will share with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, EC. Yeah. Right. Like I think all of us get that. Like, why do you live in Florida? And it's like, well, this is our home. And I see in the chat, Hillary's, the concern there is concern. There's concern more than just in this state, there's concern in this country. But I think that moments like this coming together and having these safe spaces, educating each other, coming together and we will get through this. And so, as much as it is scary, we had a very scary legislative session this last year here, a month ago, not even in Florida. But if you look, and our next webinar, we're going to really dive into that. I'd say we still came out a winner. They're going to continue. Yes, there is going to be continuing. Like all of you had said, at certain points in our lives, the challenges might be personal. It might be something, a political challenge, legal, medical. There's always going to be those challenges, but Steph, I love how you answered that in the chat. We're going to survive because we've always existed, and we're going to continue, and our kids are going to look up, and have us there. And so, Steph, I'm going to turn to you, and the next question that I had, which kind of, you can answer either one, right? Whether there was a specific challenge or maybe a specific moment for you that really stood out for you on your journey.
Yeah, I have been blessed to have so many different moments, like really intense moments of awakening. I think that's just like part of my life path is just to learn things through very intense awakenings, unfortunately, and fortunately, because I learned fast that way for sure. But one of my experiences was definitely having to, deal with the illusion shattering of, what I was told versus what I knew in my heart was true. A really, really big time for me was my relationship with my mother. As soon as, the veil sort of ripped with that, and I knew that, they were, my parents were speaking from a place of fear, of not wanting me to go through certain things, not wanting me to be myself because I was going to supposedly go through certain things in society, is when it all really cracked for me. I wasn't ever the type of person to live my life in fear, but when I noticed that like everybody else around me was living in fear and wanted to be, fit a mold or else, that really did crack for me. And something happened where I was, in a position before where I knew that I wouldn't be able to do anything about my gender identity until my parents passed or something else happened because I didn't think they could handle it. But that, shattering happened and suddenly I was awakened. I was like, no, I'm gonna do and live my life the way that I need to right now because I don't know if tomorrow's promised. And I've wasted so much time already. At the time I was 28 years old and, uncomfortable, like I said before. So I felt that once I knew and that veil shattered, I was, running to the doctor trying to get my, HRT appointment and getting everything settled because it was like a liberation of sorts where I was liberated from a negative belief system that held me down for so long that once I looked past it, it was really just go, go, go for me.
Thank you. Yeah. We see that with our kids. They hit that moment when they're ready. It had been going on in their head for so long, but when we find when our kids finally get that moment where they're like, this is who I am. A lot of times they're like, okay, now here we go, right? Let's go. Now I want hormones or I want blockers. And for parents, sometimes it's like, we have a different journey. And I always say, it's taken a long time for our kids to get to the place that they are, that sometimes, the catch up, right? There's that, parents kind of shock. And I love you talking about your relationship with your mom. I think as parents, we always want our kids to be safe, and it's scary, right? But at the same time, I always say to our parents, our kids can be safe and happy and trans, safe and happy and non-binary, out openly gay, not stealth, not like, there's so many ways, because society has in our mind that there's only one way, there's one thing that brings happiness, and that's not necessarily the truth. I mean, you see, you were saying your uncle sounded like he had, the perfect life, and that really wasn't for, unfortunately for him. And I'm sorry, for your loss, but I think that we sometimes project what we think that is, and we need to sometimes have the communication and listen. Ashley, I'm going to ask you kind of that same thing. Was there a moment or a specific challenge, or something that you want to share, that was just pivotal in your life, in your journey?
Yeah, honestly, for me, like I mentioned earlier, the moment was realizing, that I wanted to just be authentic 24/7 and not have to fit into societal norms, to appease society, right? It was about placing myself first and living authentically. And that came just honestly one day after 2 years, like I just was like, I'm tired of like adjusting. And that was really the moment for me. And from there, it just took off, and then realizing really honestly as well seeing the systems that really excluded and overlooked the community after I started, getting to know community better, whether it was like healthcare, legal systems, or like everyday spaces. And that's really also the emotional way that came, with constantly like having to prove myself or like my humanity. So I would say those challenges is where I really found my strength was in the community. And that's when I learned that while the systems may not always, show up for us, we show up for each other. And that's really where the power I feel like really lives and helps us get through this moments that we're living in.
Yeah, the power of community, the power of finding out that you are not alone. Um, if any of you, we always have a lot of folks come from PFLAG. I run PFLAG Miami, and I always say the magic happens in the room when you look across the room, and you see that there's someone else that's also going through similar or has gone through, right? Can give you advice. Listen, this is hard. Your child is going to high school, or your loved one is starting a new job, and it's scary, and to hear someone that's in the community that can say, hey, I got you. This is how I handled it. Maybe, this would help. And we get our best advice from each other, and we get our support from each other. So I love that your moment was something, that you found in community, because that is what parenting with pride is. That's why, this has come, why we have almost 4,000 families, because no matter where you are in Florida, you could live somewhere where there's a ton of resources. You're in Central Florida, and there's, or up in Jacksonville with Jasmine, or in Miami with the Yes Institute. We have spaces, but there are so many folks that live in very small towns that maybe don't see that, don't see, have the visibility of seeing other trans folks. And so, having this space, to me, I want everyone to have that moment in the sun, to feel that. So thank you for sharing that. So I want to make sure we have time for questions, because I'm sure in hearing all this story that, folks will have questions. And so my last question for our panelists is really, kind of closing with our energy, or our standing in the sun moment. We've been talking about being visible. We've talking about living openly, or, for some of us, not living openly, and what that looked like as well. So in like one or two sentences, what does it mean to you really to like stand in the sun and live as your full self at this moment? And Angelique, I'm going to start with you.
Um, for me, I think standing in the sun is the equivalent of like literally standing in the sun with no shadows, no regrets, no worries, no fears, just complete and absolute acceptance of oneself, and not worrying about what that might mean or leave behind you, but looking forward and enjoying the embrace of what is the equivalent of the sun, right? Enjoying all the joy that comes, all the warmth, all the love, all the excitement, all the happiness that is compared to what it feels like to be in the sun, right? Think about little kids at beaches for the first time, or like, that first time you actually get to enjoy yourself with the wind in your hair and the sun out. It really truly is just that, just being able to accept oneself completely and totally and love oneself unconditionally.
I love that. And just so y'all know, that standing in the sun, I have to give credit what credit is due. That was Angelique when we were discussing this webinar, and I was talking about, what I really wanted it to be, and she came up with, like standing in the sun. I was like, that's it. There we go. That is our moment. And I just love that it's Florida, and it is about that, that spotlight, that here I am. So thank you. I had to give you credit, Angelique, because you did come up with that.
Yeah, no, seriously, if anybody watches Scandal, you understand even more so. But literally, like Olivia Pope standing in the sun, it's like that's what inspired me. That was one of my favorite episodes and scenes, and just the ideology behind it. And it resonated with me so much that I've always taken that anywhere. So I definitely mean what I said, but that was what inspired that quote. Yeah.
I love it. All right, EC, what's your standing in the sun, your closing energy here?
Yeah, standing in the sun is not shrinking for other people's comfort. With my complexity, I'm a man of faith, I'm a technologist, a Southerner by choice, and a Black man of trans experience. I'm all of that at once without apology. So I stopped waiting for permission to take up space and started just taking up that space and pulling others with me. So that's what it means to stand in the sun.
I love it. Amazing. All right, Ashley, we'll go with you, and then Steph will close it out with you after.
Yes, to me, it means living your full truth without shrinking, without apology. It also means to choose joy, even in a world, that doesn't always like make it easy for us to do that. And it also means being visible, not just for myself, but also for the next person who's really trying to find their way. And I feel like most importantly, it really means that you deserve, it's understanding that, you deserve to take up space, to be seen, to shine, and to do that all as exactly authentically as you are.
Love it. Okay, Steph.
To me, standing in the sun means I am one with the sun. Trans people are one with the sun. And to me, that means we radiate and everything we touch is brighter. And when we walk into a room, we automatically change the space and the dynamics of the space because we are who we are. And And it means also that, trans people belong everywhere the sun touches. That's what that means for me.
Yeah. Ah, I love it. That was so powerful. I often say, especially, as a parent and our kids, like I'm often in awe of our trans youth. I'm often in awe of how they live so powerfully and do stand up and say, here I am. And that when you talk about like walking in the room and feeling that, if you've ever seen any of our youth panels, or if you ever been in a space where you hear trans youth talk, right, Angelique? I mean, not that y'all aren't great. Listen, the trans adults are great as well, but the youth sometimes that sense of, yes, I'm here, I'm going to take space, and everything that I touch, I belong. And I look at my child, and I'm always saying, like, wow, like he's so brave to just be like, this is me, here I am, and he's always been like that. And I admire that. But I do agree, I think that trans folks bring something just extra and radiant to an experience, to the world. So thank you all for sharing all of your stories. I'm so excited that we're actually exactly on time. I figured we'd have about 5 to 7 minutes to take some questions from the folks that are here, because I want to make sure that we're giving our audience and our parenting with Pride family the opportunity to ask if there's something that they have a question about, whether it's something that you've shared, or something that they've are curious about themselves, on their journey, their child's journey. And so I invite folks, you can put it in the chat. If you put your hand up, you should be able to come off of mute. But does anyone have any questions for our panelists? And I want to just call out, we have, and I see in the chat, Joseph from the Yes Institute here in Miami is a great resource, and they do incredible work as well. So there might be a question, Joseph, I may tap you in for an answer. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to, like I said, raise your hand or put it in the chat. And let's see, and let me look and see. Some thank yous for sharing your experience. And yeah, I mean, I also, want y'all to know this is your private life, right? And EC, like you're saying, you were stealth. Thank you all really for coming on and being visible, because it's not your job to educate others. It really isn't, and the fact that you are vulnerable and that you do talk about it is so helpful. So I just, personally want to thank you for really coming on and giving us, that perspective. Let's see what questions we have. So Hillary had asked a little bit earlier on about honest resources for their child for transition surgery, that there's not really enough information, or trying to scare people. Are there any resources that y'all have in the work that you do that maybe you could offer as a resource for her?
It would depend. We have to talk about um exactly what surgeries or what procedures, or and um how you're going about them, where you're going to get them. Like there's a lot of differences in that. I mean, there's some general some things we can say. I mean, honestly, everybody's experience with any procedure is going to be unique to them. It's going to be unique to your pain tolerance. It's going to be unique to your body's way of handling things. Some people do really great and have high pain tolerances and don't experience a lot of pain, don't experience a lot of stress. Other people are not built so it really, you have to be, unfortunately, we have to talk a little deeper about that. I'm happy to have that conversation with anybody. I've had only a few procedures, and I've had a BBL, and then I've also had my bottom surgery. I chose to go the route of all natural for my top. Hormones were very wonderful to me and my body. My body experienced them differently. But I mean, that's something I'm always open to talk about and have that conversation for sure.
Thank you, Angelique. Steph, there's a question in the chat for you, or for others, because I know you mentioned also your faith. with a very religious family, any advice on family members who refuse to accept their trans child due to religion? That is a topic we unfortunately hear so much. And she's saying it's hard to reconcile with their hateful stance with the loving people we thought they were. So it sounds like maybe you had a little bit of experience with that if you want to talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I did have a lot of those situations with my family. Honestly, I think it really depends on where the parents are at and why they are so, stuck in their ways. I think that in my case, unfortunately, it really was a matter of like religious, what I say, religious pressure for the parents. If the, for in my case, if my parents were to, they still don't condone my life. Unfortunately, I haven't seen them for the better part of 6 years. They live in Massachusetts. They're, in their mid 50s to 70, and it's been about 6 years since I've seen them, and unfortunately. What I will say is that you need to protect your peace and your child's peace and the child's peace at all costs necessary. Sometimes that means severing relationships that cause damage. Do we wish things were different? Absolutely. And the door, for me in particular, will always be open, but I do have my boundaries. I will not be, called my dead name. I will not be called your daughter. And these are simple asks. And, these slip ups do happen, but you know the intention of the person when you're having a conversation with them, especially your parents more than anything else. When it comes to children who aren't being accepted by their parents, unfortunately, that's a tricky one because, the parents are, most of the times the guardian and, you can't really separate one from the other. What I will say is that, support for the child, finding out what support looks like and how they can have some type of buffer between that, because if it's just, having to deal with their parents all the time and it could be really detrimental to somebody's mental health. So what I'll recommend is, if you see yourself in a position that you know about a child who has parents who don't accept them for anything and you don't see it budging at all, create a sort of buffer or third space for them to be able to let loose and exist, even in a room, even in a small, like little container that they can have for themselves, for them to exist the way that they truly are. That can make such a difference. I didn't have that at all growing up, and I found myself in positions sometimes that, children should never have to be in because I didn't have a space like that. So that's what I'll say with that. But if you are an adult and you're trying to work with your family, there are different resources. But the best way that I've been able to see is you live by example and you let your light grow and shine and you do everything you can do to live your life and set an example for the people who don't choose to live their life.
So well said. And I think those
Jennifer, can I add something in really quick?
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I also call BS on them being religious because in every religious text, God is love. So there's a level of as the adult that is advocating for that trans child, you can always come back with, well, God is love. So what exactly are you exuding right now? What exactly are you holding? And then I also like to remind people that if it is from a Christian level, Jesus was with the people that were oppressed, which means Jesus and God are with trans people specifically, right? Because that's what's happening right now in society. I only brought that up. I am a deacon in training in a non-denominational church. So there are trans people who are people of faith and are religious clergy. So there's multiple ways to combat that. Yes, as Steph said, holding space for the child, but also if you are the adult in the situation that is protecting that child, there are things that you can come back with to protect that child and also challenge that person around how they're holding their religious hatred when no religion holds hatred.
Yeah, that is great. We are at time, but I see there's some definitely some questions, and I knew y'all would have some questions in our chat. Um, the
I
questions
got
I see in here that are very specific about like Kathy, feel free to reach out to me because I can address those one-on-one as far as getting help with like birth certificates and stuff. But there's one question I'd love to end with, and that is if you see what are some things y'all would share with transitioning teenagers. Let's popcorn real quick and we'll end it with that. Is there something that y'all can talk directly to, a teenager maybe that is in the process of transitioning?
In reference to any teenagers who are living in Florida or experiencing it through Florida lens, like maybe born here and can't get their documents changed, things like that, patience is your biggest virtue. That name does not change the fact that you are who you say you are. That documentation doesn't change that you say who you say you are. It makes other people believe in you, but you have to believe in yourself and yourself first. No one else can tell you who you are but you, right? So you have to understand that you have to be completely okay with yourself and loving yourself and providing all the care and love that you want to yourself first. So be patient and give yourself time and give yourself grace more than anything else. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's a gorgeous city that people from all over the world travel to. Build your Rome in your due time, and people will come to see your city when it is finally fully built. They'll come to see it while it's under construction too, but they'll love you regardless. You will find your people. I promise you, it will happen. Just know that Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will you. But when it is built, baby, it is going to be the most beautiful city that anyone has ever visited. So take your time and be patient.
Ah, I love that. I love that. That may be our closer. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our Parenting with Pride family that has come on here. I want you all to, just remember that this is what community is about, and this is what visibility is about. And I'm so glad y'all have taken an hour out of your day to be here, to be together. Let you know our next webinar is going to be on April 27th. It's called Now What? Our Florida Legislative Recap. And so you will get information if y'all are part of our Parenting Pride community. You are now. You will get an email. I send a newsletter out once a month with some information. You can always go on our websites. I hope to see you there. And if you have any questions, concerns, if you had a question that you really wanted to ask and we kind of ran out of time, reach out. If you go on, you can email me, Jennifer@equalityflorida.org. If you go on our website, parentingwithpride.org, there's a help button. It goes directly to me. If you'd like to reach out to any of our beautiful panelists here tonight, I happen to know how to get in touch with them. And have a great night. Tomorrow is our Transgender Day of Visibility. Shine like the beautiful folks that you are, and wear a shirt. I've got a million.
Mhm.
And be proud, of being a parent of a trans child. Be proud of being that trans person. Be proud of being that ally, because that's part of the community too. And really be proud of being an advocate, because I'm so proud of our Parenting with Pride family. Take care.
Shameless plug for Ashley Figueroa's article coming out tomorrow with the full interview. It's going to be dropped in the Equality Florida newsletter. So if you are on the newsletter, go ahead. If you're not, go register immediately. It's absolutely great. Go check it out. It's a wonderful article on Ashley.
Love it. Thank you for
Yes.
plugging that. Take care, everyone.